Max was just telling us a story about a client he has. Um, and what's the project?
It's a heating and cooling company.
So he's got a heating cooling client, and they pay the contract in full. He goes and he does the shoot, and then they disappear. Not answering emails, not answering phone calls, to the point that he goes to the office and the receptionist is like hiding from him. But they've paid in full. What does that create in your mind as you hear that? Anybody questioning what's going on? Do you see that conflict question? Do we see that intimate? As soon as you start hearing all these problems, you're like, what could have happened? Are they going bankrupt? Do they just not like him? Is it his beard? Right? You're wondering what it could be. I want to make sure you get that intimate connection between conflicting questions, how the challenge gives us that what's going on. That's what we're trying to find. And we're going to leverage that into our third section, our third building block, which is how we can create a strong overall structure using plot points. And so we're going to think about plot points as beats in your story, right? So plot points are simply significant moments or events in a person's life that have helped shape his or her journey, right? So you think about it, beats in your story, things that are happening. You want to break it down to like the simplest way possible. A film or a video is about stuff that happens to people, right? Your decision is who are those people and what's the stuff that happens. It turns out that those two decisions actually are pretty critical. So we've kind of started on who's the stuff happened to, what do they want, and what's the challenge. Now we're getting into what's the actual stuff that happens and how do we create a strong structure out of that. So we're going to start by thinking about the functional unit of plot as a plot point. So you got your story structure, right? And that's built off plot points, individual elements or moments. Each one is a building block. So what we're going to try and think about is as you're telling the story of the mortgage broker or the heating and cooling company or the wedding, there's all these different significant things that have happened. Each one of them is a potential plot point, which you could choose to include and you can choose where it goes. With me so far? Maddie, what's a significant plot point in your life?
I was telling the guys before, I moved to America 4 months ago. I quit my job after a message at 3 p.m. from Patrick going, all right, yeah, I'll buy you a ticket, come now. And at 5 o'clock, I quit. And then 2 days later, I'm on a plane flying over to a country I've never lived in before to set up a new life. Yes, but why?
So, Maddie quitting her job, getting on a plane, flying over here right away. That's a significant moment in her life, right? So that's a potential plot point. You as storytellers then need to decide what plot points you want and what they mean. Why do they matter? We're going to talk about the two reasons behind plot points, the two main decisions. And can you think of what those would be? Like in your own story, sometimes we get so philosophical and we're in the room and it's a workshop and storytelling. You're making your own videos and you're trying to structure something. You're in Premiere, you've got a timeline, you're moving blocks around. How do you decide what are the two biggest decisions? They're super simple about how you're actually structuring that story.
Getting somebody's attention. Like
Even simpler though, the decisions of what is going in the timeline.
Bring them into the room. You're sitting down there, you've just got the job, and you've got to figure out, you've heard all this information.
You've got days worth of footage, right? Or a day, or you've got all this kinds of stuff. As you're building that story,
Does the film length matter? Because Megan was asking, how long is the film?
well, the film length matters, but all of this scales. So we're going to talk about ratios. So your ratio will scale. Yes.
what's the order?
What's the order? Okay, so we've got all these elements. What are the order in which I structure them? Right? It doesn't have to be linear. You could be creating all kinds of different B-roll, but what is the order I'm going to put the blocks? What's another big decision? The most obvious one that I hope you think about a lot, whether it's in or out.
Like the
Does it go
characters.
right? Does everything you shoot always go in every film? I hope not. Right? So you're making those, and it's important. You know, what we try and do is dive really deep into simple concepts so we make sure we really get them. A lot of times we don't think about how we actually structure our story. And when we actually dive into that, what it actually comes down to is whether it's in or out, what elements, what moments go in it, and then what order, right? So it's with that, those are our two primary questions. If you can decide out of all this footage, I only need these five things, and then this is the best order, you've got it. So we're going to try and tackle those two questions so that we can come back from and develop a story and look at all these elements and go, how do I actually put these together? So number one then is which plot points should I include and which should I leave out? Right? So now you've got all this stuff and they all represent different moments and different things happening. What do I include? What do I leave out? So to really get at that question, what actually makes for a strong plot point? So in your film, you've got different things that are happening. It's a heating, cooling kind of company. And so we're talking about his story coming up in the industry and learning heating and cooling. We're talking about him installing his first AC unit and the lovely shine and the frigid air that he loved to feel. We're talking about him building the company, hiring 10 people. You've got all these different moments, right, that you might consider in that story. What makes for a strong plot point? Therefore, a precursor to whether it's in or out. What are some of the things you're considering?
Does it serve the purpose?
Does the plot point serve the purpose? Absolutely. So a lot of times a mistake we'll make is we're structuring a film and then in the middle we'll just cut to like a scene of random stuff happening. You want to see the best example of this? Watch a wedding video. It's like, oh, there was a hole in the timeline, so I'm just throwing random footage in, right? It doesn't actually fit what the intention is. So does it fit the story? What else? You guys, again, you are filmmakers, yeah? You've made films. You have made films. You've put together videos. So in putting together your videos and deciding what is in or out, what is the thought process? And you might not have actually sat down and said, hey, I want to make a good story. Let me put the best stuff in it. But you did subconsciously. So try and unpack that as you were doing that mortgage piece or whatever it was and go, what was the thought going into why I was putting something in? What made it a great moment? All we have so far is that it's got intention.
There's an emotional connection to it. There's an emotional moment.
So emotion, right? So we've got something with emotion, which so far we've used the vocabulary of desire as well as the main thing that we're trying to find, right? So we've got desire, empathy, somebody really wants something. And what's the counter to desire? Conflict, right? So plot points that have desire and conflict are going to bring out the challenge and the emotion and help us connect. Great, is there anything else?
Information, like just general, like in a documentary, you may bring in an expert who talks about more of your background.
So there's an idea you need to convey, right? And so, or there's the mortgage broker's website and we got to, to apply, or the heating and cooling, like there's information in some way that we need to get across, whether that's graphics, text on screen, or somebody speaking about it. But we realize that there's information and this plot point has something that is critical to our objective or story. Visually stimulating. Okay, so we are creating a piece for the mortgage broker. And it's about how he wants to, make sure that you have the right home to build a family, to be connected to the community. And you got the story of him growing up and being in the wrong neighborhood and how he lost his brother because they were in a terrible area and he got in a gang and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so he creates this brokerage. He's bringing people back together. He's creating this amazing, community around him. And just as we get to that, we just cut to some beautiful drone shots of Africa. Because they're nice. I mean, have you seen drone shots in Africa?
No, are they good?
I mean, technically, that fulfills what you're saying. It's pretty footage. What is missing from that?
Well, I would, of course, want it to be something in his office or around, but...
Relevant. So it's making sure that, yes, so as we're looking at it, we do want things that are visually stimulating. It is a visual craft, right? So we're looking for things that are going to bring you in through the visuals, but again, what I'll always say is the intention. Because without that, you're the drone operator that is calling themselves a storyteller, but it's really just 3 minutes of a camera flying around, right? And people fall prey to that all the time. So many shots because they're pretty that they go, oh, I got to put that in, but it doesn't serve the story, and therefore you don't have the same impact. It's not remembered.
So online we have the plot points need to serve the desire or the conflict, or both, or no. It should be connected. Context, each plot point should serve the overall story arc towards resolution of the conflict. Relevance, this is what people are...
Someone
Beautiful.
knows Muse.
Beautiful. Yeah, so what we're getting at is definitely, you want plot points that are going to start bringing out the conflict, the desire, that they are connected, that we're not having something that's completely unrelated. They have an emotional element, they have a strong visual element, and that together they serve a larger story, right? As you break that down, it turns out that there are actually 6 essential plot points. There are 6 different types. Like we talked about 6 universal conflicts, there are actually 6 different types of plot, and this is 5. There's 6 different types of plot points, right? And this is an example of the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, which is that 20% of your efforts get 80% of the output. 20% of your clients will create 80% of your revenue. 20% of the things you do in your business creates 80% of your actual results. As it relates to your story structure, 20% of your plot points, these 6, create 80% of your engagement. So what does that tell you or suggest to you as the filmmaker and the storyteller? Do you want to focus on 100 plot points or do you want to focus on 6? Right? We have to start here. And it's hard. It is hard to tell a very strong story because we have to filter. We have to filter out so much. And we loved that drone shot. And we loved that moment where she was crying. And so we put it in. And we get this big kind of messy, muddy thing. So what we're really talking about is we try and get into plot points and structures. How do we get these main 6 elements first? Because if we have those, if you have desire and conflict woven through 6 plot points, you've got it. You will create something that people feel, that they'll share, that they'll remember, and that will convert. And like this is not beyond just feeling. You know, we've applied these ideas to nonprofit films in Uganda and tripled the fundraising goal inside of a year. Massive returns. Because when you're emotionally connected and you're engaged the whole way through, that's the best chance you're going to take the message, right? So we're going to take you through, unless we have a question. No, that was just a pen shift. We are going to take you through the 6 essential plot points, starting at the beginning and moving through the end. Okay, and this is all in service of answering the question, how do I decide what goes in my film? The best answer is we are trying to find these 6 plot points. We have to start there. Cool with me? Awesome. So number 1 is the hook. The hook is the plot point that is the opening to your story. Science says, neuroscience testing results suggest that you have 15 seconds. You have 15 seconds to emotionally and intellectually engage your audience, and if you don't, they're done. That's roughly when our brain is really tuned in, and then we're just out. So you really, if you want to get objective, like, what is that first 15 seconds? Why does the hook matter? What the goal of a hook is to make me want to watch, right? Is to get me actually hooked into the story. If I don't give you that in the first couple seconds, you are going to keep scrolling, click off, right? So we have to understand that the first plot point, the opening to your film, the first frame has to do the best job it can to hook your audience and pull them in. How might we do that? What are things that you might be able to show in a story that are going to immediately make the viewer go, wow, I want to see this? Or if it helps, conversely, what are things that you could show that are not going to hook you? Where you're like, oh no, I've seen this before, click, I'm leaving. A burning house. Okay, so we're starting out with conflict, right? So you could open up on conflict and there's been a burning house or something's happening and you're wondering what's going on, for sure. What else?
A drone shot of Africa.
A drone shot of Africa. Has anybody watched a wedding video and it opens with drone shots and slider shots of the invitations and all of that? Why are you falling asleep as you shake your head yes? It doesn't create any kind of immediate engagement, right? So we have to realize that. We can learn a lot from wedding videos about other ways of telling stories, that if you open with things that people are expecting and don't really have a lot of emotional connection, people just tune out. I will watch a lot of wedding videos to kind of see what people are doing, how they're structuring stories. 5 seconds in, I'm like, nope, done. Seen this one before, right? Because we don't have anything original. So the converse of that then is trying to give you some kind of really interesting or unique element of your story. That's going to be the biggest thing. And the colloquial way to think about that is as you're telling the story of the mortgage broker or the heating, cooling, or whatever else, if you were to sit down and tell a friend about the story, what's the thing that was most interesting to you? If you hung out with Van for the day, what was the thing that was most interesting to you that just hit you right away? That's your thinking, right? Is like, I need to give the viewer something that right away they're just like, oh, I'm in, right? And for us in Van, that was like her saying, I'm afraid of a camera. I'm afraid of 3 things. This right now scares me. Like the moment we felt that, we were like, wow. For Zelwyn, that was the moment where he was talking about the card tricks and how amazed he was. We felt his energy. We could see the trick. Like it was just right away, you're like in it. Right? Can we get that? You're trying to find something original and inspiring inside your story to hook the viewer. That is the goal of the hook. If you can also bring in your character, that's amazing. Right? If you can get them connected because we want to get desire. But that's what we're trying to do. If you have a poor hook, none of the rest of it matters. In copywriting, they call it the 50-50 rule. So if you're like a blog writer or you do content marketing, they call it the 50-50 rule, which is spend 50% of your time on the article and 50% of your time on the headline. It's crazy when you think about that because most of us, could spend 5-6 hours writing a blog post. Who spends 5-6 hours on the headline? But that's how important it is because what happens if your headline sucks? Nobody reads your article. We have to develop that level of thinking in the hook of our story. If it is not good enough, nothing else matters, right? So really give it that kind of attention. We have spent weeks on just the hook for a documentary, just trying 3-4 different versions and testing it because it is so critical if we want an hour of your life. Can we pull you in right away? Yep.
So say you have episodes, like that's what we have, and before every episode we have a previously on, and we show like 20 seconds of what, in case we have somebody new joining us or whatever.
Yeah. And when you do that, those moments are likely really interesting moments full of desire and conflict. People being really excited, lots of conflict. So you are immediately creating a hook that's full of a lot of interesting, original energy.
It makes you want to go back and watch the other episodes and whatever. But so when you're introducing the hook for the new piece, where does it go? Should it go before the previously? Like, is there a way to should you introduce the hook to pull people into this story, but then say, but last time, or how? Like, what would you?
I think that that's a much more scientific answer based on your audience and the demographics. You're looking at engagement charts and looking at, are people watching the opening and then staying to the episode? Wistia is amazing for this. YouTube does it now too. You can see engagement graphs and where people are dropping off. So we use those to test hooks. So I would actually test it. So I would do your 20-second thing and then you're hook into the piece, and then I'd reverse them and do your hook and then go boom, come up with the 20 seconds, title slide, and then come back in and see if your engagement increases. Without seeing your actual hook, versus the montage, it'd be hard to say, but the guess would be whatever one's stronger is actually going to keep people. And that's going to change from episode to episode, right? Some are going to be amazing, some are going to be a little bit weaker. So I would consider playing with that, and it's going to be whatever one is stronger. Now, to an old viewer, they're going to maybe tune out a little bit more on that old stuff. I always try and skip that on Netflix, right? So you could try a hook and then into that montage and in. So, yeah, question.
I just watched, Gwen just asked, how do you test the hook? And I just watched a presentation, I think it was last week, from the Harmon brothers, who are like a production company that's created every viral video you've probably seen.
You did the viral video launch campaign? ClickFunnels?
Maybe. Oh, yeah, that's right. But the Harmon brothers test everything. So it's like they will literally shoot things multiple ways because their whole job is about how I make this thing go viral. So they'll shoot the same thing 10 different ways, and they'll put 10 different edits out. They'll drive some advertising dollars and see how people react. And then once they figure out which is the right one, that's what they do. And so we, as filmmakers, it's easy to get locked into this is the one story. But if it is about impact, then you may be thinking about different ways to hook your viewers and testing.
Yeah, we recommend Comment Bubble, which is a free website you can use. We did this for our last movie, The New Hustle. And so we put up a screener of the full film, invited a few hundred filmmakers, and then you just have buttons, and you can attach whatever you want to them. So we would say, I'm bored, I'm excited, I'm curious, it was funny, like those kinds of emotions. And people watch it, and they just hit buttons whenever they feel something, right? But what you do is you get an actual map of how people feel throughout your film. And through that, we were like, oh my God, this is hitting. This joke here, nobody's saying it's funny. So we can cut that. Here, everybody's bored. So that's a great way to kind of easily test. Comment Bubble, it's totally free. You embed from another player, drive people there, and then they just hit buttons as they watch. So definitely looking at that stuff is huge. Okay, so the hook is your first plot point. Yeah, it opens up your story, and if it does a good job, then they're going to stay for the second plot point, which is the conflict. The conflict is the moment that the character runs into the conflict, right? So it could be Zelwyn saying, nobody in Malaysia can be a magician, and my mom saying, go back to school, right? It could be Van saying, people tell me my dream's stupid. They just say there's no way you can do this. But we're introducing the character hitting that conflict early on, the second plot point. Again, you go back to television or Hollywood movies or whatever else, you see the conflict very early, right? It doesn't happen half an hour in. Why is that so important?
Ask that question, for Law and Order, who did it?
Yeah. So what happens, we're all familiar with the rough Law and Order structure, right? Somebody's found in a garbage can, the police show up, they're having a conversation about what's going on, and then we spend the next while, they go and meet a whole bunch of people that didn't do it, and in about 44 minutes, they find the person that did, and he's convicted. Right? We got a general structure. Okay, so now what happens if we take Law and Order and we re-edit it? And so we've got an opening and, you know, the police are having coffee and they're going up, they're walking around down the street. They're talking about the cases they had yesterday. They're, you know, going out for lunch. They got some lovely lunch spots in New York. And I mean, it's just boring listening to me ramble right now, right? What happens if you have that for 10 minutes? Even 10 minutes. You're probably changing the channel, right? Like it's that important that we bring it in early. And so roughly, this is about the 10 to 15% mark at most, that you have the conflict inside of the first 15%. We're talking percentages, so it is scalable. Got an hour-long film, you can settle in a little bit more. But you've got a lot of films that'll drop you in at the explosion, like at the conflict, and we're right there. But know that it is always within that first portion very early because it creates the question that the rest of our structure is built out of. Does that make sense? Okay, so we've got the hook to pull you in, and then the character runs into conflict, which sets up the larger story.
We have a friend with a question before you go forward.
Mike was wondering, can the hook and the conflict be the same thing?
Of course. So Hollywood movies that drop you in on the explosion are the hook and the conflict. It's a hook, like it's pulling you in, what's going on, but then it is the actual conflict, right? So there's no problem with them being the same thing. It's the thought process as you go through going, what could my hook be? It could be this, it could be this, it could be this, and then what's the conflict? And you start arranging them, and through that, sometimes you'll go, same thing.